What is that you 20 years from now going to say to the you right now about this issue? Picture yourself, right? In 2045 or something like that. And you're whatever age, and I knew the person's age. What would that person say to the person right now? Just when someone needs a little perspective and calming, what would your future self say to your current self?
Hello and welcome to Education Vanguard. I'm Justin.
I'm Benjamin.
Yeah, I'm very happy today to be joined by Ben. We will be doing more co-interview podcasts in the future. So hang in there with us through this first venture of doing a co-interview with our wonderful subject today. Since it is the first time, Ben, do you want to do a quick introduction to yourself for the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Justin. My name is Benjamin Sheridan. I'm the Director of Learning at 407 Learning, which is a professional learning consultancy, and I'm currently the elementary principal at the American School of Kinshasa.
Fantastic. So we're navigating some time zones today for today's call.
Yeah.
Anyway, today we're very happy, Ben and I, to be joined by Tico Oms. He was a leadership coach and consultant. He's got a really interesting career and background that we're going to dive into. He was first in corporate, then in education as a teacher, coach, development director, and principal. He now supports leaders via executive coaching, leadership development, and creating effective teams. And is a collaborator with us with some of the events that we're doing, including an upcoming recruitment symposium online, as well as Lead to Succeed. So we'll dive into some of that as well. But for now, welcome to the podcast, Tico. Great to have you here.
So happy to be here.
Fantastic. So our first question is springing off that comment that I made about your background. You've been in three different worlds. You've been in technology, you work for Dell, aerospace and operations, and then international education. I'm just curious, what is the through line there? Because a lot of people in education, that has been their whole career, but you do have this different backstory. So what's the through line to all those chapters?
Funny, when I look at it, I agree that I have three stages. I would put my three stages as corporate, and it was mostly in technology, and then teaching the classroom, and then educational leadership. Those were really the stages for me, and things don't translate that easily. So from technology leadership into teaching, that was a big change. In my particular case, I did some reflecting and I knew that teaching was my calling, and I knew that money wasn't super important to me. I wanted financial security, but I didn't need outrageous sums of money. And so while I really enjoyed the business world and I was successful in it, I was laptop product manager for all of Asia Pacific for Dell Computers for a while. I wanted to do something I loved, and that was going into teaching. And that was a big change. Now, leadership in the business world and leadership in the educational world, that's where you have some commonalities. Yeah. And so it was like doing this, skip while I was a teacher, and then going back to some similar types of responsibilities when I went into educational leadership.
Interesting. And what, in terms of the leadership piece in corporate, translates to the education leadership? Are there commonalities, differences?
There are so many commonalities. I do like doing workshops because I love teaching. And so that's a way to continue teaching. And often my first slide says running a school like a business and using business tools to run a school better are two different things. I would never say we run a school like a business. That's a huge mistake. Having said that, business does a lot of research, has a lot of money, and what makes an effective team, what makes a good leader, what those things are things that are researched a lot. Even now, educational leaders read Harvard Business Review for leadership articles. So that translates really well. I think you do have some differences in that you have a type of person who works in schools. And those are teachers, and they tend to be highly empathetic, highly student-centered, and they're not so driven by ego and by money and things like that. The threat of you won't get a promotion doesn't work for a teacher, right? However, this is how you can serve a student better. That works for a teacher. So some of the motivations are different, but a lot of the tools translate well.
So Tico, that's super interesting. I like the way you're framing this up. And so I'm wondering, like, when you came into school and you did have almost like a grace period of moving from leadership and technology, the business world, and then into teaching, and then moving into educational leadership, what sort of changed for you in your approach from coming out of the business leadership world into the educational leadership world? Could it be approaches, ways of making decisions, relational attitudes? What sort of changed?
If you don't mind, I'm going to answer a slightly different question because I
Yeah,
acted like there
please.
was no through line between business and teaching. And I do want to
Mm.
talk about one thing. And that is, do you remember when the ISTE standards came out and they said, what's important is creativity and critical thinking and communication and collaboration and those things. And everyone's like, wow, that's so much more important than content knowledge. And I thought, duh, of course it is. And that's what working in the business world gave me. You saw people be extremely successful in the business world because they were resilient, because they were relational, because they could overcome adversity, because they could solve problems, because they could communicate effectively. And that makes, and it's not just me, often mid-career switchers are a little bit different than educators that have been solely in schools. You get educated yourself K through 12, then you go to college, then you get your teaching licensure, and then you go into schools. Really, you've been surrounded by education. And so when a teacher that's had that background says to a kid, hey, you better do this because in the real world, this is important. You're like, what do you know about the real world? You've been in education. And so I think that gave me a very different lens through which to teach. And so I was doing project-based learning before there was this thing called PBL and project-based learning. That just came natural and seemed to make sense to me. I had kids working in groups and doing real world, relevant, engaging work from the start before people said that's the right thing to do. Other teachers and leaders thought I was weird, but students loved my classes, were getting a lot out of it. And kids who weren't so successful in other classes were able to be successful in mine. So I do want to say the business world did have an impact on my teaching. And then, Ben, I'll tell you the truth. I thought I was going to retire a teacher. Like I did not go from the corporate world to the school world in order to recreate the same challenges I had in the corporate world, but in a different setting. I really wanted to be a teacher. And then, yeah, for the rest of my career. But then as I had a knack for getting certain things done because of my leadership experiences, I was being given other responsibilities. And you start out 100% teacher, and then suddenly you're running the school trips at Singapore American School, and you're a 80% teacher. And then you're just like, why don't you run the research and development trips and run that project? And you're a 60% teacher. And then you get more and you're at 40%, and then you're torn between worlds and you don't think you're serving the students so well. And so then I made the move into education. And frankly, I think a lot of the things did transfer. I think the pace had to slow down. Imagine Dell. At Dell, we had this mantra that we said all the time. There's the quick and the dead. You get that product out fast first. So we had to exceed the pants stuff all the time. Whereas in schools, you try to do that pace, you're going to leave everyone behind. And so it's go slow. It's not this, we can do this in a month. A year's okay. Yeah, you just had to learn that slowing down, making sure you bring everyone with you. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I want to just jump ahead a little bit because something in what you just said spoke to a question that we're planning to ask, and that's how do you advise people who are aspiring leaders, people that are, or maybe a department head, to create an impact in order to get into the formal leadership position? How do you demonstrate leadership in a school without being a leader, so to speak?
Yeah. Justin, weirdly, you answered the question the way you asked it. It's someone who stays within their job description as a teacher and says, but I'm a leader. You're still just doing this. You want to be a leader, then demonstrate leadership skills and practice leadership skills and take risks. And that means, and I say this to all the aspiring leaders I work with, you better be making an impact beyond your classroom. Becoming a better teacher isn't going to make you a leader. That 1% or 5% incremental improvement of your assessment practices, that's great for your students. But if you want to be a leader, you better start giving outside of the classroom in ways that show that you can take a risk and that you can stand out. And frankly, if you're leading people, all the better. I'm like the home run, I think, for a leader is you do something across divisions and you lead people with a tangible impact. Now you're showing folks that you've got leadership potential. And I also say, if at the interview you can hand on heart say, that job I'm interviewing for, I'm already doing it. I've already done it. There isn't anything they're missing because I've done all that stuff. That's how I ask them to prepare, is to take those risks and not wait. In other words, raise your hand every time there's a job to be done. And I'm going to say one more thing about that. And one of the things that folks get wrong is short game versus long game. And what I mean by that is, I'm doing this extra, I should get a block off. I'm doing this extra, why am I not getting a stipend? I'm doing this thing extra, I should. And it's, if you're going to nickel and dime the school for all these extra things, they're not going to look at you as a leader. They're going to look at you as a pain in the butt, because leaders go beyond the job description constantly. And if you say, oh, I'm not getting paid for having this evening session with parents, or I'm not getting, you can't have that attitude. And so if you're going to play the long game to be a leader, then you've got to give a little bit extra without necessarily getting it back in the short term.
So Tico, I want to give a little shout out to a book I read that sort of talks just to that. And it talks about actually embodying behaviors, right? And so it says you want to be this person. What sort of behaviors do they engage in? So engage in those behaviors and you become that person. The name of the book is Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader. And it's by Herminia Ibarra. So I thought it was quite an insightful book. It's not a super dense, long read. It gives some really good thinking strategies and approaches that are very, you can turn around immediately and implement those in your practice. So I really appreciate that thinking.
That's great. And Ben, that kind of goes into that next part that a lot of teachers need help with is executive presence. Teachers, by their nature, good presence means you're attractive. People like you, you listen, you're kind, you're empathetic, you make sure everyone feels heard, you make sure everyone feels valued. And that is an important part of leadership too. But there's another part of leadership, which is the power piece. So you've got the, and I'm oversimplifying, but there's the attractive piece and there's the power piece. And that power piece is I'm assertive and I'm decisive and I'm confident and I have clear boundaries. And that's the part that often teachers have to develop and demonstrate that they have as they slide into leadership, that they can be both.
Yeah. So another book I just actually picked up not too long ago is called The Project Book. And I thought it was about project management, which it is, but it's actually more about leadership. And it talks a lot about the difference between successful project managers and the difference between actually management and leaders. And it talks so much about leadership and how successful managers, successful project managers are actually leaders. And it talks about the difference between managers and leaders. And I think that, like you brought that up. So the way you behave, the way people will actually interact with you. And oftentimes when you're moving from a position like a teacher into a position of leadership, you're really focused on getting things done because like you said earlier, oftentimes maybe you're running an accreditation committee or you're doing some of these like temporary leadership positions and you've been successful and they're more administrative. It's like, we got to get this done. There's lots of tasks and you got to be organized. So you're really good at that. And then you move into a position of leadership, which you actually have to influence people, right? You have to influence even systems, right? And programs. And so I think when you look at influencing, it's more relational and it is more into like how your behavior gels with what is taking place and what is going on. And I think a lot of people I've seen, and myself too, when I shifted into leadership, I didn't really understand how important that was. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen too? Because I know like in schools, we really have big feelings. Like teachers have big feelings, right?
I'm more or less going to repeat what you said, Benjamin, but I use different words. When I'm coaching folks, I say that you are standing out right now as an individual contributor, so an IC. And there's a transition that you make into a team leader. And that IC, the individual contributor, your contribution and what you produce, the benefit of you and the impact to the school is directly what you do. I did this project, I did this thing, and that is exactly directly the benefit that the school receives or the institution receives. When you get into leadership, you're working through people. You're no longer the individual contributor. And suddenly what the benefit to the institution of your leadership is through other people, just what you said. And so it's that relational piece of, if I got my folks to do that stuff, then I'm successful. And knowing that you've got to be hands off, but you've got to work through your people and have good teams, good relationships, people aligned. Yeah. And that's such a hard transition for some folks. they become micromanagers because they want to keep being like an individual contributor rather than the leader of people.
Yeah, that's something I definitely identify with as well, just in terms of my own leadership journey. Though the piece you're picking up there, Ben, about behaving like the leader or acting like the leader as a way of manifesting it. I felt like, because I was a young leader in school, and for me, I started like dressing up. I'm like, all right, I'm a leader. I'm going to wear the clothes of a leader. Psychologically, that sort of makes a difference. And I think it makes a difference in terms of how people treat you as well. And then also the piece around transitioning from the individual contributor work, managing projects. These are the kind of things you can pick up, right, as to demonstrate leadership, but then actually getting a formal leadership role, you're actually leading people. And I do think that is something where it's a real transition, right? And there's not really a way to practice that as much as there is some of these other kind of management pieces, right? Like you can't practice managing people. You just, now you're doing it. So I wonder, what would you see as some of the common pitfalls that new leaders might step into in a role, and how could those be avoided?
Yeah, we're really talking about one right there, as you said, the ability to switch from individual contributor to my success is ensuring that my people are being successful is a big one. One of the important things that I often ask is, do you know why anyone should be led by you? If you can't answer that question, that's a problem, right? So you're a leader now. Why should anyone be led by you? And I'm going on about that because that's where imposter syndrome comes from. If you don't know why people should be led by you and you don't know the value that you're adding, then you're going to go manic trying to add value, improve yourself all the time. See how I add value? Let me do this. See how I add value? Let me do this. Instead of that calm leadership where other people shine, you've got everything there, but you want to say yes to everything. You want to contribute everything because you're so insecure. And so one of the first things people have to do is really understand themselves and know if whether it's strengths finders or some other kind of way of having an inner journey. But if you haven't done that inner journey, there's this great tennis book, The Inner Game of Tennis. It's really about life and leadership and everything. You need to do that inner journey and understand where you add value and where your strengths are so that you can be a calm, thoughtful leader. I think that's step one, right? And step two, I should say step two, but one of the other big ones is not understanding the challenge, but going to your strengths. And I'll give you an example. Because of my background at Dell and technology, I'm very good with innovation, I'm very comfortable with change, I'm very comfortable with fast pace. And that meant that I'm pretty good at turnaround jobs and I'm tough. And so a school in crisis or a turnaround job, or we really need to improve this, that's a comfort zone. If I don't have leadership range, then everything is going to look like a school in crisis to me because that's all I got. And so the other part is, do you have leadership range and do you know what the real challenge is? Is this a school that you just keep the trains running on time? Is it a school with, okay, let's do a little bit of improvement here and there? Or is it a school that the cracks are starting to show on the wall, but everyone's ignoring them? Or are we in crisis? And not determining what the institution needs based on your skill set. And that's a mistake that a lot of folks do is, have you heard that comment, what got you here won't get you there? It has a lot to do with the individual contributor versus team leader, but it also has a lot to do with you better work on your leadership range of skills, because if you've just got one, you're a one-trick pony, then everything ends up looking like the same problem to you.
That's interesting, Tico, because I think as you're talking through, I'm listening and I'm hearing some things. I'm running conversations that I've had with other people too. And there's this sort of new leaders find themselves sometimes stuck because they're not, like, they're used to waiting to be given permission for something, right? And so when you are moving into leadership, you can't wait for permission because you have to everyone's waiting around for you to do something. So don't wait for permission. But at the same time, when you're a new leader, sometimes you get told to stay in your lane, right? And so sometimes it's difficult to navigate those sort of two truths: stay in your lane versus don't wait for permission. What have you seen? How have people navigated that minefield?
Did you see my reaction? That is you're nailing it. Like I was making faces the whole time. Oh, goodness. So what you said is so true. leaders don't ask for permission. You've got to be a self-starter, and you've got to initiate and solve your problems. You're responsible for this. And your boss is busy. And your job is not to put stuff on their plate. Your job is to take stuff off their plate. And these leaders are like, they didn't tell me what we wanted, or where it's like, why would you put this decision on that person? That's why you got hired. You make these calls. And so I almost always tell folks it's a similar model, which is you need to figure out really fast, and it is a conversation with your boss. What is it you get to decide? Okay, I want a new schedule for I'm pretending I'm a principal, Ben. I want a new schedule for my division. Can I run that process and decide and just roll it out? Or is that your decision? Or do you want to be heard and it's my decision? Or do you want to hear me and it's your decision? But where are we with that? Is that expelling a kid? That's probably your decision. Suspending a kid is probably my decision. But you got to figure out these boundaries, and every leader's different. So there's this range of it's your call. And there's this middle range where it's probably my call, but I better inform you and hear your thoughts. And then it's my call. And I think that bottom boundary new leaders get wrong, where they're always going to the top leader, and they're just pains. Would you just get something done so I can work on my job and not do your job for you? And I've got this great example. I did a leadership retreat recently with the school. And the way I do leadership retreats is I don't just talk to the head of school and say, what outcome do you want from your leadership retreat? I say, I need to interview everyone on your leadership team for at least 15 minutes. I want to know when the school's doing well, or when your team's doing well, when your team is not doing well, what that looks like. And I want to hear all those voices. I also interview 2 teachers and a board member to get external perspective. So I get this whole thing because we have blind spots, right? So I get all this feedback, and then I'm starting to prepare the retreat, and I'm talking to the head of school, and I say to the head of school, look, one of the themes is you kind of dip down a lot. Like, people feel like you micromanage and you make decisions they'd like to do. And he was like, you are kidding me. That's crazy. And so we're at this retreat, and it was beautiful to see these folks thinking that the head of school is making all the calls. And the head of school is doing, what do you want me to do? You come to me with all your problems, and if I don't answer them, I feel like I'm not supporting you. But I can't believe you're coming to me with those questions. Why don't you take care of it yourself? And I've never seen like this misaligned assumptions like that before. That person was like, I want to work on these things, and I'm getting pulled down to you all the time. And there were a lot of aha moments with the principals going, oh, so I had more permission to do stuff than I realized. I was like, yes, we made some assumptions there.
Yeah, I think what you're pointing to there is like people use the term managing up. And I think that's a skill that you don't really get a chance to practice so much as a teacher, where you're working mostly, sort of in isolation to some extent, depending on the model. But once you're a leader, you still have a boss, right? No matter what level of leader you are, you be the head of school, you report to the board, or you're the owners, or whatever it might be. And that skill of managing your boss is actually as critical in some ways as how you manage the people that are reporting to you or the teams that you lead.
Yeah. And when you're a leader, you just have to have the courage that why are you making the same assumptions that teachers do? Oh, the principal's thinking this, or the principal's doing this. You hear all these theories teachers have, and sometimes they're perceptive and sometimes they're totally off. You're a leader now. You can't expect that your boss is reading your mind. Your boss is busy as heck. So if you have these assumptions, can you have the number of times as a leadership coach, probably my number one quotes are, so have you told them that? Have you asked them that? Have you said that to them? What is keeping you from having this conversation with your boss while you're assuming all these things? Because you've created this narrative and there is no real evidence for that narrative.
I think I've heard some sort of reoccurring themes here. And actually, it was funny. I was thinking about this earlier, and I was trying to remember what the first time we met. And I think the first time we met was actually at a Stanford design school, like design thinking session. And as we've been talking, we've been hinting at sort of ways of thinking and structures of thinking, etc. And I'd like to dip into a little bit here this idea that leadership as a discipline is something you can get better at. And a lot of people think leaders have this innate quality, they're born with it, and it just happens. But just as you were talking about, like with this misalignment of assumptions and lack of communication, and can you talk to us about how you work with emerging leaders to help them understand that leadership is a discipline that they can actually, it's a skill set, right? And behaviors that they engage in. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you work with leaders in that sense of, let me tell you how to actually get better by practicing these things?
So what you said is right. It's really hard to say good leaders have these qualities because there are so many different types of leaders that are effective in their own way. So that's step one is when you've demonstrated leadership and you've had challenges or you've had to overcome obstacles in your life, what have you leaned on? What has worked for you when you're at your best? We often do strengths finders, but we do a lot of reflection on their own personal histories so that they know what they can lean on when times are tough. And everyone is going to be different about that. And so that realization is a really important one to have. And then when we work together, I always give homework and I ask them to have an accountability partner, or I'm glad to be the accountability partner. In other words, let's do a simple one. As I said, I often do executive presence, and often it's a transition from being nice to being powerful. You are going to be assertive. And you are not going to be so worried about feelings all the time because right now results are more important. There's that balance between results and relationships. And right now, results are really important and relationships are going to be secondary, not always, relationship, but I might hurt their feelings. Well, that's okay. And so we work on that. And so when they're with me one-on-one, that's great. Yeah, I'm going to do it. Yeah, I've got my homework. Here's a perfect situation where I'm going to have a hard conversation. I have to hold them to that. And so we work on ways of having accountability and things. Because what you said is what I'm connecting back to, Ben, is what you said. It's practice. It's practice. And so if you're not doing your homework, and I say that to people, I'm a coach who gives homework. You will have homework. And we're going to start the next session with whether or not you did homework. I just got an email from someone where I said, you're going to make your success criteria. You want to look like this type of leader, but you are not describing it to me. I need 5 descriptions. And yesterday I got the email with the 5 descriptions ahead of our session that we're going to have in a couple of days because it's a practice.
That's great.
All right.
Yeah.
One of the things that one of our colleagues, Howard, talks a lot about is authenticity and leadership. And I wanted to ask, can you describe a time where you got something wrong as a leader and what changed in your practice afterwards? Now, we've all got one of these stories. I'm sure you've got a good one.
Sure. First of all, I want to go back to authenticity and leadership because it's talked about a lot. So I'm going to answer that question about mistakes because if I talk about it now, everyone's going to think I'm avoiding admitting my mistakes. Here's one. I noticed when I realized that I'd had this for years and it was a real issue that I had been ignoring. So we already talked about blind spots. And so my blind spot is this. I'm a positive person. I smile all the time. People tend to like me. I can move quickly. I get a good vision. I get excited. And I've got this other thing, which is enough talk we need to do. I don't think you can plan the heck out of something and then think it's going to go perfect. It's time to move. And I tend to be at that. It's time to move quicker than others. What I didn't realize that the effect of that was I did not listen to people. I'm positive. I'm optimistic. It's going to be great. This is fantastic. I've got a great vision. It's going to be great. It's time to move. Everyone's been heard. It's going to be great. And there were people going, you just don't listen. And that was, so the guy who thinks that people like him and gets along with people, being told over and over again, you're not a good listener. And then realizing, oh my gosh, that's true. I actually don't listen and I don't slow down and I don't bring people with me. I thought that if I would pace set and I would role model, people would follow me. Instead, I was just leaving people behind and people were feeling left out and things like that. And so that's something that I had to do a lot of reflecting on. And I'll be honest with you, leadership coaching, it's like sports coaching. The best soccer managers were very mediocre soccer players. And the best soccer players were just geniuses, the Diego Maradonas and they don't know how to coach because it just came natural. It was just this creative spark and stuff that just can't transfer. Those of us who were mediocre soccer players, and I was, but also leaders who were pretty human, end up being pretty good leadership coaches because we can relate to our clients. Someone who's just like this natural leader and everything comes easy. What kind of leadership coach are you going to be? Yeah. So I made lots of mistakes, Justin, as a leader. And I think it's made me a better leadership coach, a more empathetic. Can I go back to the authenticity piece?
Yeah, please.
And that comes up a lot. And one of the important things is to understand authenticity does come from your values, what you think is right or wrong. It's a deep thing. This is me being authentic. I believe that people should be honest, or I believe in hard work, or whatever. I think we should speak directly. The issue that comes up is when authenticity is mistaken for comfort zone. And so, well, that's my authentic self. No, you're being rude. Well, that's my authentic self. You need to learn to speak to the faculty if you want to be a principal. My authentic self is I don't speak publicly. No, that's your comfort zone. So you see, when I'm always working with folks, and half the time I hear authenticity, it's a poor practice that they need to improve, and it's actually an area of growth. You're telling me I can't be my authentic self. I'm just saying that's not your authentic self. It's something you need to work on. And so you see, I'm not saying there isn't a thing called authentic self. The thing called authentic self is something deeper. And sometimes I hear authentic self being used as an excuse to not get out of your comfort zone.
As I'm listening, I'm like relating to what you're saying. And then I'm also thinking a different way. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, both of you guys. Now, when I hear, especially new leaders, aspiring leaders, right? We want to work at the big schools, the flashy schools, the names that we want on the resume, the CV, etc., right? But when you are tapping into yourself as a leader, perhaps maybe that's not the right spot for you because you're not going to be able to show up every day as your authentic self. Maybe you're more into PBL, or maybe you're more into innovation, and maybe you're more into outdoor experiential education. And this sort of school is more of a rigor. They're super focused on exam scores. So you're showing up trying to be your authentic self, but you're channeling it into this in a direction that maybe won't allow you to develop your self as a leader in that way. Or I've seen some people who are really good at pastoral. So they're like an assistant principal, and they're just like you were born for that job, right? Or middle school, right? So you see like people who really thrive as a middle school principal, like they're special, like they have something special, and that's where they belong. But then they aspire to like these other positions and they struggle. And it's almost like you just want to tell them like, that's your sweet spot, man. That is where you shine. Like you should be content and understand yourself. Like you're killing it there. Like you're going to be like, you were born for that role. So how do you help beginning leaders find that sweet spot, or what have you seen in your work with people as a coach?
Yeah, I like the way you put it. Those were great examples of values alignment. So authentic self is values. And then you find yourself in a place where the values are misaligned. I value this real world education. I value engaging work. I value student voice and choice. That's profoundly a belief I have in what good education looks like. I believe in social emotional learning. I think that happy, healthy kids learn better. And suddenly you're in a school that doesn't believe those things. That is an example of authentic self. I cannot be my authentic self here. There's a real values misalignment. And then the question that I say to folks is, how big is that gap? And for how long can you tolerate this? Because if that gap is small and everything else in your life is working, you can tolerate it. Okay. And look at that paycheck. Or my kids are so happy here. Or I always wanted to live in whatever, Vienna or something. Okay, there's the gap's not so big and I can tolerate it because everything else is working. But when the gap becomes big, then you're starting to say, you got to look elsewhere, man. This was just not the place for you. And that's a conversation that folks have to have when they get really unhappy. And you see it because then depression starts coming out and burnout starts coming out and questioning yourself as a leader starts coming out. So a really good leader, like you said, isn't going to be effective everywhere. So you've got a leader who empowers everyone, engages everyone, energizes everyone, and then suddenly is in a place where, no, we're going to be really hierarchical and we're going to be really top down and we just make people do it or else. Yeah, you're not going to be a successful leader. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And I just want to kick it to Justin, because Justin, you've been doing this for a while and you work across so many different types of schools. What have you seen? And you've met really successful leaders, especially at Lead to Succeed. We have these people coming and sharing these leadership practices, and it is a smorgasbord of different types of leaders and different schools, different types of schools. So what would you say to emerging leaders or people finding their footing with that landscape of leadership opportunities?
I think that there's many different kinds of schools, right? There's the huge schools that have multiple divisions. You can become a highly specialized kind of leader where you're focused on one particular thing. And then you've got the smaller schools where you have to be a bit more of a jack of all trades, do a lot of different things. And I don't know if I'm the right one, honestly, if you're giving advice to people about leadership, but I think if you can go into a role where you're actually exposed to more different things, where you have to have your finger in a lot of different areas because it's maybe a smaller organization. That's probably a good place to practice leadership for the first time if you have that opportunity. And you said that if you work in a big school, they have a lot more support structures and mentorship opportunities and all of that as well. So I think that there's advantages to both approaches. I think a key element too, and we haven't really talked about it, we've talked about coaching, but also just mentorship and reaching out to people and having conversations. People always want to share with you more than you might think. And I was lucky I attribute most of my success to having mentors early in my professional career that really helped me on my leadership journey and my career journey. And I think that made a big difference. And, some of that was in a kind of most coaching posture, not in a formal way. We didn't call it that, more of a mentorship, but I think that's a really important thing for people to figure out. You don't have to be on your own. You can talk to people and be there a couple of steps ahead of you.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. And I think some people I've talked to, they have aspirations and they're in a good spot because they have people to learn from. They have really good mentors. They have people who want to see them succeed. And you gotta get that while you can. That's special because not everybody has that. But then there comes a time when perhaps it's time for you to branch out and maybe take a new opportunity so you can spread your wings.
Yeah.
And so it's a thing. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier too, Tika, is say yes to things that come your way. If you get an opportunity to do something, to be a part of something, then lead into those moments, right? Because they won't necessarily always come. If you have access to someone that can be a mentor, then lead into that. Or if you don't, try and make that happen somehow, because it's through those sorts of, and actually there was a question that came in for a registration for the recruitment symposium that I think could be a really good panel discussion question. Is networking really a fundamental need to get a leadership role, right? And I don't know what your response to that, Tico, is, and I'm keen to get what you think, but for me, it's not so much networking, like networking maybe, but it's more just, again, saying yes, being involved, like being connected, being visible, I think. Yeah, what do you think about that question?
Yeah. First of all, to both of you, what you said is right. That I think that mentoring piece is so important. And that one, unfortunately, feels like the luck has a big role. I was so lucky to work with that person who really liked mentoring and developing leaders. And then going back to what you said, Ben, is that's one of the hardest things is when you're comfortable, you're being mentored, you really like a place, and you realize that to take the next step, you're going to have to leave and go elsewhere. That's a scary one, just leaving the nest. So I get that. It would be great if in the real world, it was all about substance and what your results and your skills and your talent are what made you successful. But we do live in the real world that it isn't that simple. And yeah, you have to show people what you have and you have to network and you have to know the right people. That's just the real world. So there is a gap between the ideal of your work speaks for itself and who knows that. Are you built? Politics and networking are just the reality of it. And so if we're developing future leaders and if we're talking to leaders who aspire, we're not going to serve them well if we don't talk about that and prepare them for the real world. I say all the time, I am as idealistic as the next person, but I live in the real world. And that's the world I need to prepare you for.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a good segue to talk about what we have planned at Lead to Succeed. So Lead to Succeeds, and the next one will be in May 2026. And where you're kicking off a really special new program that we're calling the Leadership Development Program. And it's got 2 tracks, one for new leaders and one for aspiring leaders. So it'd be great if you could just describe what that program is, how it will work for people that might be interested.
Sure. What we're trying to do is prepare folks with the skills to be successful leaders and prepare folks with the skills to manage their careers. And that includes networking, resume, interviewing skills, just that whole career thought, as well as skills for real impact. And what we know about adult learning is it has to be timely and it has to be relevant to what you're doing. And of course, it's social learning. And so what we do is we get it together with other folks who have the same aspirations to become a leader or are new leaders and facing the challenges of new leadership. And so we're going to have 3, let's call it 2 parts, but I'll talk why one part is in 2. But we meet as a cohort together, and the first meeting is going to be face-to-face, and we meet at the conference. It's going to be the kickoff, which is going to be great. And we talk about, hey, why are we here? We get to know each other, what we aspire to, what the goals are. So it's great relationship building. And we do some work together as well. So we kick it off like that. But there's also a part to it that there is the one-on-one coaching, because while we talk as a cohort about these themes, you have something that's keeping you up at night, or you have a real obstacle or a real thing and you need help. That's where you get the one-on-one coaching. So it's a combination of the cohort, what the one-on-one coaching to personally support you through your journey. And then the cohort portion has 2 parts. One is we will dive deep into an area of leadership development, like the typical ones. How do you have a hard conversation? Or how do you handle conflict? How do you build a high-performing teams? How do you build trust? So these are, and so we will talk about those in a nice discussion way, engaging. But then we will also have case studies. And probably the first one we'll do while we're at the conference. I'll provide like a random case. But the fun is that as we get going and we're online, it is someone will have the hot seat, so to speak, and they're going to present their case. This is what was facing me. These are the issues. This is the impact. This is the obstacle that's in my way. This is where I'd like to be. And then turn it over to the group. And then we have, through a protocol, a way of discussing and supporting each other. And while one person in particular gets a lot out of it, the rest of us are learning as well as we go through that protocol. So it's almost like group coaching and learning at the same time. So it's super engaging, super fun way to learn and prepare for leadership.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm really excited about bringing this to the education community. I think it's going to be really having that blended approach where everyone gets to know each other, you build the relationships, and then having that 10 months online following the conference into the following school year, I think will really set people up for not only that year, but hopefully a successful career in leadership.
Yeah. And Justin, I hope that next year that's a support group even between the meetings. And then you just asked about networking. And that's a group that you're going to become so close with that for the rest of your career, you've got a special relationship with that group. I hope that 10 years from now, someone in that group is opening the door for someone else in that group.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you touched on 2 things there. One is that networking goes both ways, right? Some people think it's I'm going to do this because I get something. Actually, you have a lot to give as well. And so when you're part of a cohort like that and you come together, you're sharing. It's not a one-way street. You're sharing opportunities, you're sharing support, you're sharing resources, you're sharing knowledge. It's that social capital piece that acts as a multiplier. So we all have our own human capital, right? We all have our skills and dispositions, etc. But when we come together, we actually can access other people's skills. So that social capital acts as like a multiplier. And the other piece, which I totally forgot because I was just getting so excited about that piece. Oh, I remember what it was. Actually, sometimes just like we're having these inner monologues, like you were talking about problems, and we're running through these things in our mind all the time. And sometimes we get stuck in a loop and we think we have a firm understanding. And then we go to try and explain it to somebody. And the second we actually verbalize it and we're talking through it, we actually gain some deeper insights into actually what the problem is. Or someone can literally just say, it sounds like this. And, oh yeah, you're right. I totally missed that. So I think the power of the cohort is something that can't be overlooked.
That's right.
Absolutely. Great.
Yeah, you had a book recommendation. I read a book recently I liked too. So you know how everybody says, "Oh, that person's a go-getter." Title of the book is The Go-Giver. And it says, before you become a go-getter, you should be a go-giver. And you give without the expectation of getting something, like a real giver. And so the book is called The Go-Giver with that. Before you become a go-getter, be a go-giver for a while.
Love it.
That's great. Yeah, we'll drop the links to all of the book recommendations in the show notes for the episode. It's great. But we are almost at 50 minutes here, and it's been a really great conversation. I've enjoyed so much. Even though people sometimes in these conversations, you learn a lot as well. So I've certainly taken a lot away from this conversation. Tico, thank you.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed chatting with you all as well. Those were great questions, really thought-provoking questions.
We do have one
Love hearing more
exit
about
question before. Yeah, we do have one exit question before we go. We've talked a lot about coaching, so I want to provide all of our listeners a free coaching, a sort of snippet of coaching here. And my question is, what is your favorite question when you're working with a coachee to unlock a stuck problem? So if you're talking with one of your coaching clients, what's the question you ask?
So much of it is instinct and intuition. So I have a few different ones, but recently we were particularly stuck and things just weren't resonating with it. And I say, look, 20 years from now, what is that you 20 years from now going to say to the you right now about this issue? Picture yourself, right? In 2045 or something like that. And you're whatever age, and I knew the person's age, and you're that old. What would that person say to the person right now? And it had an amazing calming influence on that person. And so I think I may go to that question a little more often, just when someone needs a little perspective and calming. What would your future self say to your current self?
I think that's great.
Perspective. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.